Aurelia Hale never came home early. That was the unspoken rule of Hale Dominion, of her board, of her staff, of the vast mansion that waited for her like a museum after hours. But on that particular evening, after a boardroom ambush, after voices cutting like glass, after a man twice her age slammed a binder shut and warned, "Your children can't become your weakness." Aurelia, she walked out before the meeting was even adjourned. She needed air. And silence. The car rolled to a stop in her driveway. She stepped onto the stone path heels, clicking sharply 1, 2, 3 each sound, slicing through the cool stillness like a metronome reset too fast. She punched her access code. The heavy lock unlatched with a mechanical thunk, followed by the soft hiss of the climate-controlled air shifting to greet her. Inside, everything was as it always was, quiet. A quiet so thick and familiar she could feel it settling into her bones. No laughter, no feet padding across the hall, no sudden squeal of surprise from a 4-year-old. Her triplets, Emma, Daisy, and Luna, had lived in silence since birth. Profound deafness, uncertain prognosis, endless protocols, 4 years of sterile routines and carefully structured therapies. Aurelia exhaled slowly, letting the familiar stillness wrap around her the way exhaustion sometimes did. She set her leather bag down. The soft thud echoed lightly against the marble floor, bouncing once, then dissolving into the air. She closed her eyes for a moment. Just breathe, she reminded herself. But then something strange. A tremor, barely there, just enough to make the glass on a nearby shelf rattle a hair's breadth. Aurelia froze. Another tremor. Deeper this time. Like a slow heartbeat pulsing beneath the floorboards. Her eyes snapped open. This house did not vibrate. Nothing in this home was ever out of place. Every speaker was integrated, every system automated, every corner designed for quiet. But right now, someone was shaking the foundation. Aurelia's breath hitched. She followed the faint vibration as it traveled through the marble into the hardwood corridor, then down toward the wing she never allowed anyone to access unsupervised. The children's therapy room. Her heels clicked faster now, echoing off the walls. Click, click, click. Her pulse kept pace. She turned the corner. The vibration grew stronger, bass deep, and rounded the kind that traveled through rib cages and into the spine. It thrummed through the air, a low whoom, whoom, that she felt more than heard. "What in the world?" she whispered under her breath. She pressed her palm to the wooden door. It hummed. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't possible. She pushed gently, just enough for a sliver of light to escape, and the world on the other side of the door shattered her breath. Through that narrow crack, Aurelia saw a large old wooden speaker, scuffed, mismatched, absolutely not part of any approved therapeutic equipment, sitting directly on the polished oak floor. Her 3 girls, her silent, cautious, emotionally distant girls, were laughing. Not aloud, but with their faces, their bodies. Daisy spun in circles, cotton dress fluttering as she felt the vibrations under her feet. Emma bounced up and down, palms pressed flat against the floorboards, eyes wide with wonder. Luna, her shyest, ran her fingertips along the wood as if reading some secret message pulsing through it. And kneeling beside them, sleeves rolled up, head tilted gently, was a man. A man in a Navy janitor uniform. A man she had never seen in this room. A man who was supposed to be cleaning hallways, not touching her daughters. He tapped the floor with an open palm, one soft tap, then another, each movement syncing with the bass in a rhythm so steady it made the children mirror him like a flock of small birds learning how to fly. His expression wasn't reckless. It wasn't playful. It was tender. Too tender. Aurelia felt something sharp twist behind her ribs. Fear, anger, and something else she refused to name. Her hand tightened on the door frame. The wood creaked softly beneath her grip. He didn't notice her. None of them did. He was too focused on her daughters, on their tiny feet pounding the floor, on the way their bodies lit up as they followed the rhythm he guided. Emma stumbled. Before Aurelia could even inhale, he steadied her with one hand, guiding her back into motion with the other. His voice was low, she couldn't hear the words, but she saw his mouth soften into something warm, reassuring. Aurelia's pulse roared in her ears. This was her home, her children, her rules, her world. And it was being broken open. She shoved the door fully open. It slammed against the wall with a sharp, cold bang. The bass cut out instantly, the man's hand flying to the power button without hesitation. The room fell silent again. The sudden absence of vibration left her dizzy as if the air had been yanked out of it. Her daughters froze, mid-movement, eyes wide. The janitor turned, startled, rising slowly from the floor as if afraid a louder motion might shatter what was left of the moment. Aurelia's voice came out icy, slicing across the room. "What on earth are you doing with my daughters?" The man blinked, breath-catching. Her daughters looked between the two adults, confusion and fear flickering across their faces. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. The silence felt louder than any bass. A single, trembling second stretched thin like a string pulled too tight. And then, in a quiet voice that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the room itself, a different narrator. Older Weathered whispered into the story. She had fired 20 caregivers in 4 years. And I was just the janitor, until the day she came home early. The vibration was gone, but the tremor inside her chest remained. For a long moment after Aurelia's outburst, the room stayed frozen, her breath sharp, the janitor's shoulders tense, her daughter's wide eyes darting between them like startled birds. But as the last trace of vibration faded from the wooden floor, a heavier silence returned, one that belonged to this house long before the janitor ever did. And that silence carried her backward, not in time, but in memory, as if the floor itself whispered, "You weren't always this afraid." The scene blurred around her, dissolving into the soft hum of a different room, one flooded with hospital light. The first time she held her daughters, the NICU monitors were the only things that spoke. Tiny green lines pulsed on screens. Machines breathed on behalf of lungs too small to trust. Nurses whispered in gentle tones meant to comfort, but all Aurelia heard was the absence of crying. She had imagined that moment for years, imagined 3 newborns wailing the room filled with life. Instead, she was greeted by silence. A doctor cleared his throat gently, paper rustling in his hands. "Severe congenital hearing loss," he said. "All 3. Outcomes. Uncertain." Aurelia remembered the sound of her own heartbeat, fast, unsteady, echoing inside her like footsteps down a long, empty hallway. She remembered the man standing beside her, their father. "Intervention will be extensive," the doctor continued. "Therapy, surgeries, years of commitment." She heard the breath beside her sharpen. He stepped back, then farther. In her memory, his voice was always the same steady cold, slicing through her like a dull blade. "I can't do this. I didn't sign up for 3 deaf kids." A pen scraped across paper. A door slammed one loud final punctuation. His footsteps faded, and the hollow quiet he left behind never did. The flashback dissolved into the present with the faint buzz of the security panel in her hallway, Aurelia standing alone, staring at her reflection on the dark screen. Her daughters were toddlers now, but the silence had grown with them. She built systems to manage it. The mansion transformed over the years not into a home, but into a controlled environment, air purifiers humming softly, cameras placed in every therapy corner, protocols taped to walls like commandments. Boardroom by day. NICU memories by night. Her life stretched somewhere between power and panic. 20 caregivers had come and gone. She could still hear them. The young nanny who'd lasted 3 hours. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Hale. I just can't take this quiet. It feels like a hospital." The specialized therapist who'd lasted a week. "These girls need emotional engagement, not just procedures." The assistant she fired after discovering she'd recorded Luna's meltdown to post online. It was just a video people love, inspirational stories about special kids. Then the one who'd stolen jewelry. The one who'd brought an unauthorized visitor. the one who'd tried to get a picture with Aurelia for clout. One by one, Aurelia removed them, each failure tightening her grip, adding another lock, another rule, another layer of polished professionalism over the trembling truth. She was terrified of losing control, terrified of failing, terrified of loving her daughters so much she couldn't breathe. She thought structure would keep them safe. Instead, it made the house feel like a private clinic, sterile, echoing, painfully orderly. When she returned home each night, the air felt still. Her daughters sat in perfect lines of light on the floor screens glowing in front of them. No sibling rivalry, no giggles, no chaos. Just three little girls existing in quiet, parallel lines. And Aurelia, standing at the doorway like a stranger peering through a glass wall, told herself it was fine. Until the agency called. She remembered that call with unnerving clarity. The hum of her office air conditioner, the click of a pen against her schedule. Her own voice strained after another 14-hour day. Ms. Hale, the representative, began carefully. We're short-staffed for the weekend. Only one candidate is available for the overnight rotation. Aurelia didn't even glance up from her laptop. Is he certified? A pause. Well, technically he works within our building maintenance program. He's a janitor, but he's looking for extra hours. His background check cleared. He's reliable. Aurelia's pen stopped mid-click. A janitor. For her daughters. For the one part of her life she couldn't afford to mismanage. Her voice tightened. I need someone who follows instructions, not someone who improvises. He's known to follow instructions extremely well, the representative replied with a nervous laugh. Doesn't push boundaries. Quiet, respectful. Quiet, respectful. Predictable. 3 words she could work with. Fine, Aurelia said, finally. If he can follow instructions, I don't care what his title is. Send him. She had meant it, at the time, but standing there now, her daughters glowing from a joy she hadn't seen in years, their tiny hands still hovering over the wooden floor, where the vibrations had lived seconds ago, Aurelia felt something crack open inside her chest. This wasn't what she'd prepared for. This wasn't part of any approved protocol. A man who should have been mopping the hallways had found a way to reach her girls in a language she didn't understand. Aurelia's throat tightened. Her voice trembled from something she refused to name. The janitor stood frozen, unable to meet her eyes. Her daughters, Emma clutching Daisy's sleeve, Luna stepping back toward the silent speaker, watched her with fear she didn't want to recognize. The tremor under her ribs deepened, because underneath the fury, underneath the shock, underneath the instinct to command and control, there was envy. Her daughters had never looked at her like that, not with that light in their eyes, not with that anticipation in their tiny bodies. She swallowed hard. Her voice came out colder than she intended, sharper meant to shield her from the truth flooding in. Turn that thing off, she ordered, even though he already had. And step away from my children. He obeyed instantly. But his eyes, those tired, gentle eyes, lingered for half a second on the triplets. It was enough to make her chest ache. And from somewhere far away, the narrator's voice slipped back in low and steady. If he can follow instructions. That's what she said, but none of us knew how much following the rules had already cost her. The janitor stood perfectly still after Aurelia's icy command hands at his sides, shoulders tight as if bracing for a blow. He didn't speak. He didn't defend himself. He simply stepped back quiet, controlled, respectful, exactly the way the agency had promised. But his eyes betrayed something else. Not guilt, not fear, something older and sadder. Aurelia didn't want to think about it. Not now. She gathered her daughters with trembling hands, ushering them away from the silent speaker on the floor, away from him. Luna kept glancing back at the wooden boards as if waiting for the ground to pulse again. Daisy lingered near the doorway, palms pressed against the frame. Emma gripped her mother's jacket tighter than usual. The janitor lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he whispered, barely audible even in the quiet. Then he slipped out of the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Night fell heavy on the mansion. Aurelia avoided the therapy room entirely. She didn't want to look at the floor, the speaker, the dust unsettled in the corners. She didn't want to think about the way her daughters had moved alive in a way she hadn't seen before. Instead, she retreated to her office, drowning herself under spreadsheets and emails, hiding behind the hum of her computer fan. But the silence in her home tonight felt different, thicker, restless. It reminded her she wasn't alone in this house. It reminded her someone else was working the night shift. Him. While the mansion slept, the janitor's shift began. The bus dropped him off 2 blocks from Hale Dominion headquarters, cold wind scraping across his knuckles, shoes thudding unevenly against the pavement. His backpack, old and thinning at the straps, bounced against his shoulder as he walked. The night air carried the scent of rain-soaked metal, a reminder of the industrial jobs he used to take when music no longer paid the bills. He paused under the security light before entering the side gate, letting his breath settle. Inside, the hallways were dim but familiar. The faint buzz of fluorescent lights, the soft whoosh of the ventilation system, the rolling wheels of his cleaning cart echoing down the polished corridor. He liked these sounds. They kept him company. Most people saw him as a shadow passing through buildings, after hours a ghost with a mop. But once years ago, he had lived in a world full of sound. Music had been his first language. He'd worked as a bass player for a small church band, then later as a sound technician in community theaters, adjusting EQ levels, tuning mismatched speakers, coaxing warmth out of aging soundboards. He had been good at it too. Nothing glamorous, nothing that would ever make headlines, but honest work that made him feel connected alive. Then came the accident, the funeral, the deaths, the little girl he loved more than anything being sent to live with her grandmother because he couldn't afford stable housing. He found work wherever he could. And when all else failed, janitorial work kept him alive. He wasn't ashamed of it, but he sometimes wished people knew he used to be more than the man who mopped their floors. When he first stepped into Aurelia's mansion 2 weeks ago, he'd expected a typical luxury home. Too many marble surfaces, too many hallways, too much space for one person to ever use. He wasn't prepared for the silence. He remembered his first night cleaning the therapy rooms. 3 tiny chairs, 3 tablets glowing in a row. The air purifier hummed softly, the only rhythm in the room. He'd seen the girls glance at him, quick, curious looks, then return to their screens. He waved once. Emma blinked. Daisy ignored him. Luna tilted her head, unsure. He didn't mind. Children took time. Especially children who lived in a house that felt more like a carefully curated museum of stillness. But then, by complete accident, he dropped the mop handle. The thump that echoed through the room was deep and round, shaking the wooden floor just enough for Daisy to freeze. Her eyes widened. She pressed her palm flat against the floorboards. Then she smiled. Not a polite smile. Not a shy smile. A real one, sudden and bright. Emma looked over next her face, lighting with curiosity. Luna moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't hear but clearly could feel. He had crouched down, stunned. That one vibration, barely more than a heartbeat, had reached them. A thought crept into his mind. Gentle, hopeful, almost forbidden music doesn't have to be heard to be understood. So the next night he tested it. A softer thump. A gentle tap. A rhythm drawn from muscle memory. They responded again. And that was when he saw the dusty old speaker in the storage room, its wires tangled its wood, chipped its sound imperfect but its bass still strong. He cleaned it, rewired it, tested it in his tiny rented room first. And the moment the floor vibrated beneath his hands, he whispered, "Maybe." This could help them. He never meant to break rules. He just wanted to give 3 little girls a doorway into a world they'd never been able to touch. Now, after Aurelia's confrontation, he moved through the mansion with slower steps. His breaths were careful quiet. He didn't want to disturb anything, not tonight. His cart rattled gently as he entered the back hallway near the therapy room. He let his fingers slide across the polished wood. This floor had carried a miracle earlier. A small one, but enough to keep him awake with hope. He paused by the storage closet. The old speaker sat inside, silent now, its scuffed side leaning against a bucket of cleaning supplies. He knelt, tracing the rim of the speaker with a thumb. He felt a pulse of regret, a soft aching. He had only wanted to help. Maybe I should have asked. Maybe I should have stayed in my lane. Maybe I shouldn't have hoped at all. He swallowed. Then from the corridor behind him, a faint sound, the rustle of small feet shuffling. He turned sharply, but no one was there. Just the memory of 3 little girls dancing without a sound. His shift ended hours later. He walked toward the gate, pulling his jacket tighter as the night wind brushed against him. Before stepping out, he glanced back at the mansion's outline against the sky, large, perfect, and silent once more. "Tomorrow's another night," he murmured, "and I'll stay out of the way, if that's what she wants." He didn't know that upstairs Aurelia sat awake, too, replaying the afternoon in her mind with a tightness in her throat she couldn't explain. And neither of them knew what that old speaker in the closet would soon set in motion. The next night the mansion felt heavier than usual, as if the silence itself were waiting to see whether he would dare try again. He shouldn't. He knew that. Aurelia's voice had been sharp enough to cut through steel, but as the janitor stepped into the hallway outside the therapy room, his fingers brushed the wooden floor. He felt the faintest memory of the girls' tiny feet tapping against it the day before their first dance, their first spark of joy. It tugged at him. He exhaled slowly, a breath that shivered with something like longing. Maybe tonight he'd just try one more thing. Not to break rules, but to understand why that moment had happened at all. He went to the storage closet. The old speaker sat where he left it, quiet, battered, but full of promise. He picked it up with gentle hands as if lifting something fragile and alive. If I keep it soft, he told himself, if I keep it controlled, maybe it won't hurt anything. Maybe it would help. Inside the therapy room, the triplets were already awake, an unusual sight this late. Daisy sat cross-legged on the rug, tapping her finger against her shin. Emma dragged a wooden toy across the floor in a slow rhythm. Luna, ever the watcher, leaned against the wall with her cheek pressed to the wood. All 3 lifted their heads when the door opened. The janitor paused on the threshold. He kept his voice low, careful. "Hey, little ones," he murmured, though he knew they couldn't hear him. Still, tone mattered. Softness mattered. He placed the speaker in the center of the room, not near the girls, not near the walls, but on a patch of open hardwood where the vibrations could spread evenly. He wiped his palms on his uniform, steadying himself. He didn't want to rush, not like last time. He plugged in the cable. A soft click filled the air. Then a quick hiss of static, a tiny sound, but enough to vibrate faintly through the floor. Daisy perked up. Emma crawled forward. Luna tilted her head, sensing the shift. "Easy," he whispered, adjusting the settings with slow, precise motions. Then, bass. Not loud, not shaking the shelves, just a slow, rolling hum, ma, 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 like waves brushing the hull of a quiet boat, like a heartbeat the size of the room. The floor responded. The boards gave a soft tremble that pulsed through the children's hands and toes. Daisy's eyes widened. She pressed her palms down hard, her mouth forming a perfect O of wonder. Emma let go of her toy and placed her cheek to the ground, giggling a soundless laugh. Luna approached the speaker with tiny steps, stopping just close enough for the vibrations to ripple up her legs. The janitor swallowed hard. It felt like magic, but it wasn't. It was physics. It was resonance. It was the oldest kind of music. He lowered himself onto the floor, tapping lightly with his fingertips, 1 beat pause, 1 beat pause, then 2 quick taps. The vibration carried his rhythm like an invisible string. Daisy followed first, tapping back. Emma matched her a moment later. Luna pressed both hands flat, absorbing the pattern before copying it with her heel. He smiled, not the casual smile of a man doing a job. A fragile, odd smile born of watching something impossible and beautiful unfold right in front of him. He eased into a slow tempo, letting the bass hum beneath them like a warm breath. 1 tap. Stop. 2 taps. Come closer. 3 taps. Jump. The girls watched him, bodies leaning toward the rhythm. Then, hesitant, clumsy, determined, they mirrored him. Daisy stepped toward the speaker with 1 tap. Emma tried to jump on 3, stumbling into a breathless, silent laugh. Luna pressed her palms into the wood, feeling everything before committing. The room wasn't quiet. Not anymore. Not to them. The janitor closed his eyes, letting the moment settle into him. They're hearing something, he thought. Not in the way the world expects, but in the way the world feels. He had spent years repairing speakers, tuning stages, carving out space for sound. But nothing had ever felt like this. He kept the rhythm gentle, steady, patient. He didn't want to break whatever fragile bridge was forming between them. He tapped again, 1 beat, then 2, and the girls followed each in their own little orbit of discovery. He felt something in him unclench, something tight, something old. Abby, he whispered in his mind, thinking of his own daughter. You would have loved this. You always felt music with your whole body, too. He didn't let the ache linger. There wasn't space for grief here, only presence, only the floor humming beneath them like a quiet miracle. He leaned back on his hands, just watching. Emma circled the speaker, tiny feet padding across the wood, catching every shift in vibration. Daisy pressed her cheek to the ground, relishing each wave. Luna danced not with steps, but with her hands waving them in the air as if the rhythm were threading between her fingers. He kept everything gentle, respectful, safe. He knew he was trespassing in a world that wasn't his. But he also knew deep in his bones that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness were the ones that mattered most. He checked the time. His shift was nearly over. He reached forward to turn the volume down, but something near the ceiling flickered. A tiny red dot. A camera light. His breath caught. It blinked twice, then steadied. Someone was watching. He froze, hand hovering over the dial. Panic shot through his chest. Had she been watching the whole time? Had he crossed a line again? Had he just lost the only job keeping him afloat? But the children didn't notice. They were still dancing in their quiet, vibrant world. He swallowed hard, turned off the speaker, lifted it gently from the floor. "Okay, little ones," he whispered, even though none of them could hear him. "That's enough for tonight." They pouted without sound, tiny frowns, tiny shoulders slumping. He forced a smile, tapping once on the floor in farewell. 3 tiny feet tapped back. He felt the sting behind his eyes and blinked it away. This wasn't forever. This couldn't be forever. This was just a moment he'd carry long after the world forgot it existed. He gathered his things, stepping out into the hallway. The door closed with a soft sigh. Behind him, the room fell still again. But the floor still remembered. And so did someone else. Because far above, behind a screen lit with cold white glow, a pair of eyes had watched everything. Aurelia Hale never admitted to insomnia, but her security footage told the truth for her. On most nights, long after the mansion went still, a glow from her home office could be seen spilling faintly into the hallway, steady, unwavering like a lighthouse guarding a storm she refused to acknowledge. Tonight, that glow came earlier than usual. Her heels lay abandoned beside her desk. Her blazer hung over her chair, and she sat leaning forward, eyes glued to the security monitor as if it held the verdict to her entire life. She clicked open the feed for the therapy room. The video buffer spun, loaded, and there he was, the janitor, in plain sight, again. He knelt on the hardwood floor, shoulders relaxed, patience radiating from every movement. He tapped a slow rhythm. The speaker hummed its gentle bass, and her daughters, her 3 silent girls, lit up like small lanterns flickering into life. Aurelia's breath left her in a tight rush. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't luck. He'd been doing this for days. She watched Daisy press her cheek to the boards. Emma circled the speaker like she was learning orbit. Luna waved her hands through the air as though the vibrations shimmered around her. The janitor wasn't reckless. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't improvising with wild, desperate hands. His movements were measured, intentional, gentle, and that gentleness did something to her chest, softened something she had cemented long ago. But the softness lasted only a second before fear surged in to swallow it whole. What if it's dangerous? What if it interferes with therapy? What if it sets them back? What if he breaks something inside them I can't fix? Her heart raced. Fear always sounded like footsteps in her mind, fast-pacing, relentless. She zoomed in closer. His hands were steady. His rhythm was controlled. The girls responded with a quiet, instinctive trust. Her throat tightened again. Why them? Why him? Why now? A soft knock sounded at her office door. Aurelia startled, slamming the window shut just as Dr. Marshall, her daughter's lead developmental therapist, stepped in carrying his clipboard. "Apologies for the late hour," he said, voice low and clinically calm. "It's time for the girls' monthly observation summary." Aurelia straightened. She slipped into CEO posture without thinking, spine tall, arms folded, jaw set. "Well," she asked. Dr. Marshall flipped a page. "I've reviewed their recent sessions," he began. "Muscle tone has improved significantly, especially their core balance, coordination too, and—" He hesitated. "Their affect seems brighter." Aurelia frowned. "Brighter. Define. Brighter." "They're reaching more," he said, initiating touch, seeking sensory feedback. Her pulse stumbled. Reaching. Touch. Words she'd dreamed of hearing for years. "Have there been changes to their routine I wasn't made aware of?" he asked. Her heart lurched. Before she could answer, tiny footsteps scurried past the office door. Emma and Luna chased Daisy, soundless but energetic little shadows flickering down the hall. Dr. Marshall watched with a small smile. "See. That energy wasn't there last month. Something is stimulating their sensory pathways." Aurelia swallowed hard. Not something. Someone. She dismissed him, quickly making an excuse about late meetings and needing rest. But the moment the door closed, she reopened the footage right to the moment she'd left off. The janitor leaned forward, adjusting the speaker's volume dial with careful fingers. He didn't raise it. He lowered it, protecting them. Then came the moment that struck her the hardest. Daisy stumbled during a 3-tap sequence. He reacted instantly, steadying her with an instinctive, gentle hand, not grabbing, not startling, but guiding her weight back into balance. His expression was pure concern, no hesitation, no frustration. Aurelia felt a sharp, unfamiliar burn behind her eyes. Because in his face, she saw something she hadn't dared hope for in years, a man who wasn't running. The next morning, she was still in her office coffee, untouched. The footage played again and again and again, different angles, different nights. Each viewing cut deeper. The janitor wasn't breaking rules because he wanted to play hero. He wasn't undermining her. He wasn't careless. He was paying attention. To rhythm. To their energy. To the way their bodies leaned into the vibrations like flowers leaning toward sun they couldn't hear but could feel. Aurelia pressed her fingertips to her forehead. What have I missed? What haven't I given them? What part of motherhood did I outsource because I was too afraid of breaking them myself? She didn't have answers, only a growing ache she didn't want to face. By evening, she still hadn't confronted him, but fate, or maybe her daughters, forced the moment. In the hallway near the therapy room, she heard the soft scuff of his shoes. The janitor stood with his cleaning cart shoulders slightly hunched, not defensive, but almost apologetic. He looked like a man bracing for a verdict he expected to be guilty. Aurelia stepped forward, then stopped. Her breath caught in her chest, because through the open door behind him, she saw Emma's small hand pressed flat to the floor, waiting for a vibration that wasn't coming. Waiting for him. Aurelia swallowed. Her voice came out flat, controlled. We're done with whatever that was, she said quietly. Until I review everything. He nodded, once small. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. But his eyes flickered with something unmistakable grief. Not for himself, for the girls. He turned away to resume his cleaning, his movements slow, deliberate. Aurelia lingered at the doorway, gripping the frame as if it anchored her. She didn't know yet that the footage she had watched obsessively for hours would soon unlock something far deeper than fear. Guilt. Truth. And the beginning of a shift she'd never seen coming. Because tonight she would keep watching, and she would finally see him. Really see him. The house was unusually quiet that afternoon. Not the clinical silence Aurelia had engineered for years, but something tighter, denser, as if the walls themselves sensed a storm rolling in. The janitor felt it long before he saw her. He stood in the therapy room, kneeling beside the old speaker. He wasn't playing anything he wouldn't dare not after what she'd said last night. But the girls were restless. Their small feet tapped at the boards in impatient patterns as if begging the floor to sing again. Daisy tugged at his sleeve. Emma crawled onto his lap without warning. Luna sat cross-legged near the speaker's shadow waiting. He smiled softly, trying to distract them. A gentle tap on the floor. 2 fingers drumming out a quiet pattern. Nothing amplified, nothing strong enough to be caught by the cameras. Yet even the smallest vibration sent the girls stirring, leaning, swaying, sensing. "Easy," he whispered, brushing a curl from Emma's forehead. "We're just playing. Nothing more." But the girls weren't satisfied. Daisy stomped once her version of a demand. Luna slid her palms flat against the boards, searching. Emma tapped back at him, insistent. He hesitated. Before he could decide, a sharp click cut through the air, the sound of heels striking hardwood with surgical precision. The door swung open. Aurelia Hale stood in the frame, her presence hitting the room like a gust of cold air. Her jaw was tight, her shoulders rigid, the glint in her eyes sharp enough to slice through steel. The children froze. The janitor rose slowly to his feet, pulse thundering in his chest. The bass wasn't playing. The speaker was off. He'd been careful. But the scene, him surrounded by her daughters, all of them at the center of a ritual she didn't yet understand, was enough. Her voice landed first. Quiet, controlled, lethal. "What did I say about being near my children during unapproved hours?" He swallowed. "Ma'am." "I wasn't. You were." No emotion, no hesitation. Her heels clicked as she stepped in, scooping Luna into her arms. Emma clung to his pant leg before Aurelia pulled her away too quickly, her tiny hands trembling. Daisy backed up, eyes darting between them. The janitor's heart broke at the sight. "I wasn't playing music," he repeated softly. "I kept everything off. They were just what Aurelia snapped. Just breaking protocol. Just encouraging dependency on a method I have not vetted. Just assuming you know what's best." Her voice was rising, not loud but sharp, threaded with fear she didn't know how to name. "I didn't mean any harm," he said quietly. "They were reaching for the floor. They wanted to feel, I don't care what they wanted." She cut in the words, cracking in the air like a whip. "I am responsible for their well-being. Not you. Not some impulsive experiment." He stepped back as if struck. Her daughters felt the tension too. Daisy tugged at her mother's blouse, trying to get her attention. Emma's eyes filled with soundless tears. Luna pressed her forehead into Aurelia's shoulder, overwhelmed. Aurelia's breathing shook. She looked down at her children and then back at him. "You're just the janitor," she said. Not cruelly, not mockingly, but with the blunt force of someone reminding herself where the lines were drawn. His chest tightened. "I know what my job description is," he replied softly. "I've never forgotten it." Her lips pressed into a hard line. "Then act like it." Something in him snapped, not in anger, but in quiet heartbreak. He gestured toward the children, small hands reaching out to him even as Aurelia tried to turn away. "Ma'am," he said, voice trembling despite his effort to stay calm, I follow rules for a living. I followed them my whole life, but I can't pretend they didn't connect with something last night. You saw it. I know you did." Her eyes flickered. "Aurelia," he added, using her name for the first time before he even realized he'd said it. They weren't just reacting to sound. They were reacting to feeling, to rhythm, to a connection. She stiffened. "Do not speak to me like you understand my children. I don't understand everything," he admitted. "I'm not pretending to, but I saw something change in them. You can't deny that." Aurelia's throat tightened, because she did see it, over and over on replay. "It doesn't matter," she whispered almost to herself. "It can't matter." The janitor shook his head slowly. They moved toward something for the first time. They reached. They laughed, if you can call it that. They let themselves feel something new. She blinked rapidly twice, fighting emotion like it was a threat. "They're not ready," she insisted. "They're fragile." He stepped forward, then caught himself and stopped. "They're tougher than you think," he said quietly. "Kids usually are." Her shoulders tensed as if bracing against an invisible blow. "You don't know what I've seen," she whispered. "What I've carried. People walk into our lives, get overwhelmed, walk right back out. My daughters don't need another man playing hero until the moment things get hard." His jaw clenched. "I'm not that man." She lifted her chin sharply. "They all say that." Silence spilled between them, heavy, suffocating. Then she delivered the sentence that carved the moment into stone. "Starting tomorrow, you stick to your cleaning schedule. No therapy room, no contact, no floor time. You keep your distance." The janitor felt the words sink into him like cold water. He didn't argue, didn't fight, didn't plead. His voice came out barely audible. "Yes, ma'am." Aurelia turned, gathering her daughters in her arms. Their small fingers reached back toward him in silent protest. He stepped away so they wouldn't see the hurt flicker across his face. The door closed behind her with a soft, devastating finality, and he stood alone on the silent wooden floor where magic had briefly lived. The old speaker sat in the corner, dark, powerless, abandoned again. And beneath the quiet of the house, something else stirred, a question neither of them wanted to confront. If this was the end of the experiment, why did it feel like the beginning of a much bigger storm? Aurelia Hale had always believed in control of her company, her reputation, her home, her emotions. But that night, as the mansion settled into its usual hush, she felt something slipping through her fingers. The girls were asleep. The janitor's shift had begun, and Aurelia found herself walking toward her home office with a weight in her chest she couldn't name. The moment she sat down, the glow from the monitors washed across her face, cold, clinical light that usually steadied her. Not tonight. Tonight, her hands trembled. She opened the saved footage folder. Her cursor hovered, and then she clicked play. The screen flickered to life. There he was on the very first night he'd crossed boundaries she hadn't realized she'd drawn so tightly. He wasn't loud. He wasn't chaotic. He wasn't careless. He moved with deliberate gentleness, checking the girls' reactions with the precision of someone who had learned to listen with more than just ears. Aurelia leaned in closer without realizing it. Daisy's face glowed with curiosity. Emma crawled toward him with unsteady determination. Luna, cautious little Luna, reached out for the floor as if touching a secret language only she could sense. And the janitor. He knelt in a posture that wasn't submissive, but protective, like someone guarding something fragile and sacred. Aurelia's chest tightened. She'd watched the footage before, but tonight something was different. Tonight she wasn't just looking at what he'd done, she was looking at why. With each tap of his hand on the wooden boards, the girls responded not like patients in a controlled environment, but like children learning a dance they had been waiting for their whole lives. Aurelia pressed her palm against her own sternum, feeling the thud of her heartbeat. Steady. Too steady. As if her body was determined to pretend she wasn't falling apart inside. The speaker's bass rolled gently across the room through the camera audio. It was muffled, a little distorted, but still warm, almost human. Her throat burned. They shouldn't have responded this deeply, she told herself. Not to him, not to something so untested, but they had, with a rawness she hadn't seen before, with joy she had almost forgotten was possible. Why them? Why music? Why now? She whispered into the empty room. A question she needed answered yet was terrified to confront. She scrubbed forward in the footage. Suddenly, something new. The girls weren't the only ones being vulnerable. There was a night 3 days earlier when the janitor had lingered long after the girls had fallen asleep. He sat alone on the therapy room floor back against the wall, hands dangling loosely between his knees. The room was dim lit only by the soft glow of a lamp in the corner. And then she heard it. His voice, quiet, cracked around the edges, came through the camera's microphone. "Abby." "I'm sorry," he murmured, barely audible. "I couldn't send as much money this month. Things are tight. I'm trying." Her breath hitched. He kept talking as if speaking to someone miles away or years gone. "I think I found something good here," he whispered. "Something real. Those 3 little girls. They feel things through the floor, like you used to, like music moves through them instead of around them." His voice wavered. "I don't want to mess it up this time." Aurelia's throat closed around something sharp. She pressed a shaking hand over her mouth. He has a child. Not just a child, someone he felt he'd failed. A quiet apology drifted out of the speakers. "I'm doing my best, sweetheart. I swear I am." Her heart twisted violently. She had assumed he knew nothing about caregiving, nothing about heartbreak, nothing about fear. But he did. Maybe more than she ever had. She rewound the clip, watched it again and again. Something inside her cracked. This wasn't a man playing hero. This was a man trying to make amends for a life that had bruised him deeply. The realization landed like a weight on her chest. Maybe I was wrong about him. She clicked through more footage. There were nights he finished cleaning early just to sit quietly near the girls, never touching them, never crossing lines, simply watching them breathe. Protective, present, tender. Then, nights when he practiced rhythms alone, tapping them on his thigh the same way he later tapped them on the floor. Preparing, trying, learning. And nights when he watched the girls struggle through tablet exercises, his expression aching with empathy. He wasn't looking for an opportunity. He was looking for connection. The connection she herself had struggled to build. Aurelia's breath grew uneven. She couldn't hide behind her CEO voice now. Not behind protocols or polished surfaces or the illusion of perfect motherhood she'd used to shield herself from the truth. She had walls. He had wounds. But her daughters had none of those. They simply felt what was real. Hours passed. The mansion remained still. Finally, unable to sit any longer, Aurelia stood and walked down the hallway barefoot, something she never did. The wooden floor felt unfamiliar under her soles, warmer than she expected. She reached the therapy room, stopped at the door, listened. There was no music, no vibration, just the soft, steady rhythm of a man breathing as he wiped the floor with slow strokes, lost in his thoughts. She hovered hand inches from the doorknob. She could walk in. She could say something real. She could admit what she'd seen. Instead, she froze not out of anger but out of fear of what honesty might unlock. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't certain she was the hero in her own home. Her hand fell to her side. She stepped back slowly. And as she walked down the hall, the narrator's voice threaded through the quiet. That night, Aurelia learned that silence doesn't always mean stillness. Sometimes it's the sound of the truth finally finding a way in. The morning sunlight crept gently across the mansion's hardwood floors, but the air felt different, charged, almost trembling with something unspoken. Aurelia stood at the end of the hallway, arms folded, heart pounding in a rhythm she wished she could slow down. Today, she would have to face him. Not as a CEO, not as a woman used to complete control, but as a mother who had watched her children come alive in a way she never knew possible. She inhaled, steadying herself, then stepped toward the kitchen where the janitor was quietly returning cleaning supplies. He didn't see her approach not until she spoke. "Wait." The word came out softer than she intended. The janitor froze, turned. His eyes lowered instinctively as if preparing for another reprimand. But she didn't sound like a woman ready to fire him. She sounded hesitant. "We need to talk," Aurelia said. He nodded, slowly, bracing himself. "Of course, ma'am." She swallowed. Her palms felt strangely warm. I reviewed the footage. His shoulders tensed. I saw everything she continued. The girls, the method, your involvement. He exhaled sharply through his nose, half shame, half dread. "If you want me gone," he murmured, "just say it. I'll finish the week. I don't want to make things harder." "No." She cut him off quickly, surprising them both. "I'm not firing you." He blinked. She cleared her throat. "I don't fully understand what happened in that room, but I saw real improvement in my daughters, and I saw—" Her voice faltered. "I saw that you care about them." He said nothing, not because he disagreed, but because he didn't trust his voice. Aurelia continued quietly. "I want to revisit what you were doing, but safely, within boundaries." He straightened, not defensive, not prideful, just attentive. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," she said, "breath unsteady. You can continue your vibration method, but I'll supervise, and I'll bring in a specialist to analyze the results." For the first time, a flicker of hope moved across his face. "You're giving me another chance." "I'm giving them another chance," she corrected gently. But her voice shook in a way that suggested the chance belonged to both of them. That afternoon, the therapy room buzzed with a quiet anticipation. The hardwood floor seemed to hold its breath as Aurelia stepped inside barefoot. The janitor lifted his eyes in surprise. She looked down at her heels, held in one hand. "You said vibration works best with direct contact." She hesitated. "So, I should feel it too." "Right." His voice softened. "Yes, ma'am." Their eyes met, brief, hesitant, meaningful. Then he set the speaker in the center of the room, plugged it in, checked the dial twice. His movements were steady, respectful, almost reverent. The girls were already buzzing with excitement, tiny feet shifting hands, tapping their thighs, anticipation glowing in their faces. Daisy stood closest to the floor. Emma clung to her mother's calf for balance. Luna hovered at the edge waiting for the first pulse. The janitor knelt, cables in hand. "Okay," he whispered to himself. "Nice and slow." He turned on the speaker. A faint hum filled the air, soft warm like a quiet breath beneath the floorboards. The vibration rolled gently across the wood. Daisy gasped without sound. Emma slid off Aurelia's leg and pressed both palms flat to the floor. Luna's eyes widened, bright, shimmering, alive. Aurelia lowered herself gingerly to the floor opposite the janitor. The warmth traveled through her palms up her arms, settling in her chest. She froze. She wasn't expecting it to feel like this. Not like noise, not like disruption, like a heartbeat. "Is this what they feel?" she whispered. The janitor nodded, tapping a gentle rhythm on the boards. "Yes, their bodies interpret vibration before anything else. For them, this is music." Aurelia exhaled, breath trembling. "I've never felt anything like it." The girls responded instantly as he shifted rhythms. A soft tap summoned Daisy closer. 2 quick taps made Emma twirl clumsily. 3 taps sent Luna running into Aurelia's lap with surprising confidence. Aurelia laughed softly, an unfamiliar sound in this room. Emotion crept up her throat, warm and heavy. The janitor watched her quietly, his eyes softening. "They trust you," he said. She looked down at her daughter's 3 small faces glowing with joy and whispered, "I didn't think they even knew how." "They do," he replied. They always did. They just needed a language they could feel. Aurelia swallowed. She wasn't sure if she wanted to cry or smile. "Can you show me how to do it?" she asked. His breath stilled. "You want to try?" "Yes," she said. "If my children can feel this, then I need to know what it's like. Teach me." He hid the shake in his hands as he shifted close enough that their knees brushed. He guided her fingers gently to the floor. "Don't force it," he murmured. "Just tap. Slow. Even." She followed his cue. Her first tap was too soft. Her second, too sharp. Her third, almost right. Then the vibration met her skin, rolled through her bones, blended with the steady bass humming from the speaker. The girls reacted instantly as if hearing their mother for the first time in years. Daisy crawled into her lap. Emma hugged her waist. Luna pressed her cheek against Aurelia's hand. Aurelia froze, overwhelmed, undone. The janitor looked away respectfully, giving her the moment. But she felt the shift. A tether forming. A bridge she never thought she'd stand on. Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't know it could be like this," she whispered. His reply was gentle. "Neither did they. Not until you sat here with them." For the first time in years, the therapy room didn't feel cold or clinical. It felt like a small, fragile piece of home. Before the session ended, Aurelia's phone buzzed. A new email from Dr. Marshall. She opened it, hands still shaking, daughters still pressed against her. Preliminary findings. Substantial improvements noted in sensory integration, emotional responsiveness, and motor coordination. Recommend further structured exploration of vibration-based method. Aurelia stared at the screen. Her vision blurred. The janitor noticed. "Bad news." "No," she whispered. "Not bad at all." She looked at him. Really looked at him. And something inside her shifted again. He didn't smile, but relief softened his entire face. She exhaled. Maybe this wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was the first right thing she'd allowed in a long time. Progress, Aurelia had learned, was never quiet. It didn't glide through life gently. It arrived with ripples, whispers, and eventually, consequences. And in a company as large as Hale Dominion, consequences traveled fast. By the time she arrived at headquarters the next morning, the air felt wrong. Too many glances, too many hushed conversations clipped abruptly when she passed. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft chime, but the weight in her chest only grew heavier. Her phone buzzed. Another message. Then another. Board chat private. Is she really letting a janitor run therapy sessions? This will blow up in the press if we're not careful. We need to intervene before she makes an emotional decision. Aurelia locked the screen with a sharp flick. Her jaw tightened. She should have expected this. Hale Dominion thrived on innovation but choked on anything that even smelled like risk. And letting a janitor lead a breakthrough with her hearing-impaired children. That was more than risk. That was scandal. She pushed through the glass doors of her floor, ignoring the stairs. But she couldn't ignore the voice waiting in her office. "Good morning, Aurelia." Dr. Langford, old money, old ego, old medicine, sat with his legs crossed, clipboard resting against his pristine suit. He was the board's favorite medical advisor, the kind of man who believed protocol was a sacred text. Aurelia didn't sit. "If you're here to question my parenting, don't waste your breath." He lifted a brow. "Parenting nor liability." "Yes." Her fingers curled at her sides. "We've received concerning reports," he continued. "You've allowed an untrained worker whose position, I might add, is janitorial to perform unsupervised sensory interventions on your daughters." Aurelia felt heat rise in her chest. They responded to him. He found a method no one else has tried. "Exactly," he replied coldly. "No one has tried it. Because it is unregulated, unproven, potentially harmful." She took a slow breath. "You weren't there. You didn't see what I saw." Langford stood adjusting his tie. What I see is a mother in denial, desperate enough to cling to miracles because the alternative is too painful to accept. Aurelia's entire body stiffened. He took a step closer. End it. Immediately. Or the board will step in. She didn't answer. She couldn't not without saying something she'd regret. But inside, a single truth rang louder than the threat her daughters had never been safer or happier than under that gentle vibration. Still, fear gnawed at her. Fear always did. The pressure only grew worse. Rumors bloomed like wildfire through the corporation executives whispering about reckless behavior assistants forwarding screenshots her PR team subtly probing for statements. And then the past came back. Literally. At sunset, as Aurelia stepped out of the elevator in her mansion, the front doorbell rang. The chime was soft, but it sliced through her nerves. She opened the door, and everything inside her froze. He stood there, tall, expensive suit, familiar arrogance, the father of her daughters. "What are you doing here?" Aurelia asked, voice dangerously quiet. He gave a faux gracious smile. "I heard concerning things. About the girls. About you." He paused deliberately. "Thought you might need help." Her blood chilled. "You forfeited that right when you walked out of their NICU." He shrugged. "People grow. Change. I'm willing to be involved now." "No," she said, stepping forward. "You're willing to benefit." His gaze sharpened. "If you think I won't use your questionable decisions against you in court, think again." Aurelia's breath stilled. Court, custody. Threats she had prayed she'd never hear again, and all because she had let someone care. She closed the door before her ex could say another word. Her hands shook as she locked it. She found the janitor an hour later in the therapy room wiping fingerprints off the glass cabinets. He looked tired more so than usual. His movements slow, methodical, almost resigned. "You don't have to stay late," Aurelia said quietly. He didn't turn around. "I don't mind." But she could hear it, something in his voice had dimmed. The girls scattered around the room were restless. Daisy tapped the floor absently. Emma clutched a stuffed elephant to her chest. Luna wandered in small circles, sensing a tension none of them understood. Aurelia stepped inside. "There's been pressure at work. Backlash." His jaw tightened. "Because of me. Because of the method she corrected gently. They think it's dangerous. Irresponsible." He finally faced her. "And what do you think?" She opened her mouth. But before she could answer, Daisy, excited by the sight of him, ran too quickly toward his knee. Her foot caught on the edge of the rug. She stumbled, fell hard, palms slapping the wood with a sharp thud. Aurelia gasped. Emma and Luna froze. The janitor was beside Daisy in an instant. He lifted her gently, examining her hands. No blood, no swelling, just shock and trembling. Daisy's soundless cry ripped straight through Aurelia's chest. "Easy," he whispered, pressing Daisy against his shoulder. "You're okay, sweetheart. Just scared." Aurelia dropped to her knees beside him. "Let me." She reached for Daisy, but Daisy clung to him. That image, her daughter choosing someone else, hit her with the force of a tidal wave. Fear, jealousy, guilt, all crashing together. "This," Aurelia whispered hoarsely, "this is exactly what they warned me about." He looked up, confusion and hurt flickering in his eyes. A kid stumbling. That happens in every home. "No," she said quickly. "The dependency. If something worse happened—" His voice sharpened for the first time. "They're not porcelain. They're children." She flinched. He softened only slightly. "You're scared something will go wrong no matter what you do." "I get it. I live that fear every day with my daughter." Her breath stuttered. "Don't you dare." "I'm not attacking you," he said quietly. "I'm telling you I know what fear can turn you into. It turned me into a ghost in my own kid's life. Don't let it turn you into one in theirs." The words landed like a blow. Aurelia's voice cracked harsher than intended. Hiring you might have been a mistake. Silence. A deep, pained silence. He held Daisy for a moment longer, then carefully passed her into Aurelia's arms. The child hesitated just a moment before resting her head on her mother's chest. Without a word, the janitor stood and walked out. Aurelia held her daughter tightly, heart-hammering, breath shaking. For the first time since the girls were born, she felt like she was losing something she hadn't even allowed herself to want. And the narrator's voice slipped into the quiet storms, "Don't destroy only what's weak. Sometimes they test what's worth rebuilding." The house felt impossibly still that night, more still than any night Aurelia had lived through since the girls were born. Not the sterile quiet she'd crafted with expensive machines and rigid schedules. No. This silence felt heavy, bruised, wounded, like the aftermath of something breaking. Hours had passed since the janitor walked out of the therapy room without looking back. Hours since Daisy's fall. Hours since Aurelia said the one sentence she instantly regretted hiring you might have been a mistake. Her daughters were finally asleep, sprawled across their beds with their stuffed animals tucked under their arms. But even in dreams, their faces held that lingering tension, the confusion of a moment that had shattered trust. Aurelia retreated to her office, closing the door behind her. She felt brittle, as if the slightest sound might crack her open. She sat before the security screens. Her shaky fingers hovered before clicking play. The footage began with the familiar glow of the therapy room, soft gold from the lamp in the corner wooden floor shining faintly. The camera angle caught everything Daisy's stumble. His gentle reflexes, the look of fear on Aurelia's face, the way Daisy reached for him instead of her. But the moment that made her breath stutter was what came after, when he turned away from her. Not coldly, not angrily, but with the heartbreak of a man who had just lost something he didn't know he was allowed to care about. She rewound, replayed, again and again. Not because she doubted what happened, but because she wanted to understand it, wanted to know where she had gone wrong. She leaned closer to the screen. His hands shook when he passed Daisy to her. She hadn't seen that before. His voice cracked when he said, "Don't let fear turn you into a ghost." She hadn't heard the pain behind his words. And when he walked out, his shoulders sagged, not like a man avoiding confrontation, but like someone carrying the weight of every mistake he'd ever made. Aurelia pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. All this time, she whispered, "I thought I was protecting them." But what if she had been protecting herself instead? Protecting herself from the terror of losing her daughters, from the memory of a man who abandoned them, from the idea that someone else, someone imperfect, someone unexpected might actually reach them in ways she couldn't. Her eyes burned. She switched to the earlier recordings, the ones she had watched the night before, and fast-forwarded until she found it. The janitor alone, sitting on the floor, head bowed, hands clasped, talking softly to his daughter, his Abby. "Broke my heart missing your last recital," he whispered in a voice soaked in regret. "I'm trying, sweetheart. I'm really trying. I just want to be someone worth staying for." Aurelia closed her eyes. The room felt unbearably small. He wasn't the threat. He was the only one who understood what it meant to fail a child and fight like hell to do better. She stood abruptly. She couldn't avoid this anymore. Running was what her ex did. Avoidance was what fear demanded. Tonight, she would choose something else. She found him outside in the cold, wiping down the exterior windows, even though his cleaning shift ended an hour ago. The light from the porch cast shadows across his face, making the exhaustion even more visible. He froze when he saw her. "I'll finish up and head out," he said quietly. "Didn't want to leave things undone." "Stop." Her voice cracked. He lowered the cloth, waiting. Aurelia swallowed hard. "I shouldn't have said what I said earlier. I was scared and angry, and I took it out on the wrong person." He stared at the ground. "Your daughters are your world. I get why you reacted." "No," she whispered. You don't. Not completely." His eyes rose slowly to meet hers. She continued, "I've been living in fear since the day they were born. Fear of losing them, fear of failing them, fear of trusting anyone with them, and fear of," her voice trembled, "feeling anything I can't control." The wind brushed past them carrying the faint smell of winter. Aurelia breathed out. "You didn't make a mistake in that room." "I did, because instead of seeing what you were doing for them, I saw everything I was afraid of." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "I never wanted to overstep. I just—" "You helped them," she cut in. "You helped them in a way no one else has." He didn't speak, didn't move. She took a few steps closer. "I want to show you something," Aurelia said softly. She led him back inside, into the therapy room. The wooden floor reflected the faint moonlight. She reached behind a cabinet and pulled out the speaker. "Ma'am Aurelia," she corrected gently. He hesitated. "Aurelia." "What are you doing?" She placed the speaker in its usual spot. Then she sat on the floor, barefoot. Her breath shook. "I want to do this right," she said. "With supervision, with science, with intention, and with you." His chest rose sharply with a breath he didn't realize he was holding. She cleared her throat. "If you're willing, I want to continue the vibration method." He blinked, stunned. "You do not, because I'm desperate," she said softly, "but because I finally understand what my daughters have been trying to show me." She touched the floor lightly with her fingertips. They feel the world through vibration, through connection, through the parts of us that aren't afraid. The janitor knelt opposite her. Their knees almost touched. And for the first time since they met, there was no tension, no protocol, no fear. Only two people who had been broken in different ways finally meeting in the same quiet room where three small girls learned to dance without sound. He reached for the volume dial, adjusting it with a reverence that made her chest tighten. The floor hummed soft, warm, familiar. The vibration rolled up her arms, into her chest, into her heart. Her eyes filled, not with fear, with relief. Then before she could speak, the girls, woken by the vibration, peeked into the room. Daisy toddled in first. Emma clutched her stuffed elephant. Luna padded in sleepy but drawn to the rhythm. Aurelia held out her arms. All three ran to her, not stumbling, not confused, but following the vibration like a beacon. They collapsed into her lap, limbs tangled, tiny hands pressed against the floor, giggling soundlessly. Aurelia lifted her gaze to the janitor. For the first time, gratitude shimmered in her eyes. The narrator's voice whispered through the quiet hope rarely speaks in words. Most times, it's a vibration. The first sound every morning used to be the low, steady hum of the air purifier. Now it was different. Now it was the soft thump, thump, thump of 3 sets of tiny feet racing down the hardwood hallway, followed by the gentle of bass rolling through the floor like a distant storm that never broke. The mansion hadn't gotten louder in the way most people meant. There were still no squeals, no shouted arguments, no shrieks of laughter. But there were sounds. New ones. The rushed breathing of 3 little girls trying not to miss their favorite part of floor time. The soft pad of Aurelia's bare feet as she stepped out of her heels at the threshold. The quiet click of the old wooden speaker coming to life in the center of the therapy room. That room did not feel like a clinic anymore. It felt like a small sacred stage. Months had passed since the night everything broke, and then began to heal. In that time, the vibration method had moved from reckless experiment to pilot program under strict medical review. Dr. Marshall visited twice a week now, not to shut it down, but to observe, with a growing smile he didn't bother hiding anymore. He watched the triplets respond more quickly to cues, watched them seek each other out, watched their little bodies grow braver with every session. Their coordination, he'd said one morning setting his clipboard aside, is better than we projected for another year or two. Whatever this is, it's working. Aurelia hadn't answered out loud, but her heart had. Of course it's working. It's not just therapy. It's belonging. The floor hummed now beneath them as the girls practiced a simple sequence: 2 steps forward, 1 turn, run back to mom. Daisy led the charge feet, drumming out a happy rhythm. Emma wobbled but corrected herself, using the vibration like rails to hold on to. Luna hesitated, then followed when the janitor tapped gently 1, 2, 3, inviting, not demanding. Aurelia sat cross-legged on the floor, hands open, ready. 3 little bodies crashed into her in a tangle of limbs and cotton dresses, followed by soundless giggles that made the air brighter anyway. Their breath hitched fast and joyful against her neck. She laughed, really laughed, her shoulders shaking. Across from her, the janitor watched with that quiet, stunned expression he still wore sometimes, as if he couldn't quite believe he was allowed to stand in this moment. Again, he asked softly. 3 heads bobbed in wild agreement. He adjusted the bass just a touch, making the floor pulse a little deeper. Aurelia felt it rise through her bones, steady and warm. She glanced at him, and their eyes met over the girls' heads. No tension, no accusation, just something simple and solid. Trust. Later that week, the sounds were different. No bass, no tiny feet, no wooden floor humming. Instead, the murmur of hundreds of voices, the subtle clink of glasses, the faint buzz of a microphone being tested on a stage, the Hail Dominion Annual Summit. Aurelia stood backstage, heels on this time, fingers resting lightly on a stack of note cards she knew she wouldn't use. Her speech was already written somewhere far deeper than ink. Through the curtain, she could see the audience, a sea of investors, board members, staff, cameras. And near the back wall, in a borrowed button-down shirt and his best pair of worn shoes, stood the janitor. He looked like he didn't quite belong. He looked like he was ready to bolt. But he stayed. Her heart beat in time with the soft feedback hum of the microphone. The host introduced her name. Applause rose and fell, and Aurelia walked onto the stage. She didn't start with profits or projections or mergers. She started with a story. When we built this company, she began, her voice carried by speakers into the vast room. We built it on a simple belief: everyone deserves to be heard. She let the words hang there 5 seconds, 10, long enough for the room to settle. I forgot, she continued quietly, that included my own daughters. The room shifted. The air changed. Silence pressed in. Aurelia told them. Not every detail, not every raw wound, but enough. About 3 little girls born into silence. About 20 caregivers who came and went. About a mansion that felt more like a hospital than a home. About fear. About control. About the cost of building walls so high she couldn't hear the people she loved most. And then she said, a faint smile in her voice, an overnight janitor. Put an old speaker on my wooden floor. A ripple of surprise. A few exchanged looks. He didn't have a doctorate. He didn't have a title that impressed anyone. What he had, she went on, was a way of seeing my daughters the way I couldn't anymore, as children who needed to feel the world, not just be protected from it. She spoke of the vibrations, the dance without sound, the way her girls found a language in the floor under their feet. She didn't cry, but her voice grew thicker, richer, warmer. I stand here as your CEO, yes, she said, but today I'm speaking as a mother who was taught something by just the janitor. She turned, found him in the crowd. Their eyes met. I learned, she said slowly, that sound isn't only what we hear in our ears, it's what we feel in our bones, in our families, in our communities, and sometimes the people we overlook are the ones holding the key to a better way. She gestured toward the back. Would you stand, please? He froze. Then reluctantly he straightened. Hundreds of heads turned. There he was, no spotlight, no grand entrance, just a man who'd carried a mop and an old speaker into a quiet house and changed it forever. Thank you, Aurelia said simply. No title, no flourish, for teaching my daughters to hear with their hearts, and for teaching their mother how to listen again. The applause started slow. then grew, then swelled. He looked like he wanted to disappear, but for the first time in a long time, he let himself be seen. That night the house was quiet again, not empty, just peaceful. The triplets were asleep on the therapy room floor, curled up around each other with their feet still resting on the boards where the last faint bass vibrations were fading. Their breathing was soft, steady, almost in sync. The old speaker sat nearby, off now, but ready. Aurelia and the janitor leaned against the wall side by side, their shoulders almost but not quite touching. The floor under them still held a ghost of the day's rhythm. "You did well today," he murmured, "up there on that stage." She huffed a small laugh. "I was terrified. You didn't sound like it. That's the trick." Her voice softened. "Truth is, the scariest part wasn't the board, or the press. It was saying your part out loud." He turned his head, surprised. "My part?" "That I needed you," she said. "That my daughters did. That we all did." The words settled between them like a warm blanket. He swallowed. "I just followed what the floor told me." She smiled at that, at the way he always came back to the simplest things. For a long moment they sat without speaking, just listening. To the faint creak of settling wood, to the slow rhythm of 3 small hearts sleeping nearby, to the shared quiet between 2 people who had almost missed each other completely. Finally, Aurelia let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Stay," she said softly. "Just a little longer." He didn't move, didn't answer with words. He simply let his shoulder rest fully against hers. The narrator's voice slid gently into the darkness. The triplets never heard the world the way most people do, but they heard the vibration of a mother choosing courage over fear, and a janitor who refused to stand outside the door of their lives. Thanks to an old speaker, a wooden floor, and 3 little girls who danced before they understood why they found a music that belonged only to them. And once you've felt that kind of music, silence is never empty again. The bass was gone, the house was still, but somewhere deep in the floorboards the echo of their shared rhythm remained soft, steady enough. More than just the janitor, more than just the billionaire. A family learning to listen, too. Before we close tonight's story, I want to leave you with this. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it's not loud or perfect or planned. Sometimes it's just a small vibration on a wooden floor, or a quiet moment when someone finally chooses courage over fear. This story reminds us that every family has its own language, and sometimes we find that language in the most unexpected places, through people the world tends to overlook, or in parts of ourselves we thought were long gone. If you've ever lived through a moment like this, if you've seen kindness appear where you didn't expect it, or witnessed a child learn to connect with the world in a new way, I invite you to share your story in the comments below. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs tonight. Before you go, tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community come together from all over the world. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel so you won't miss the next journey, the next lesson, the next moment that reminds us we're all connected in ways we can feel, even when we can't always hear it. Thank you truly for spending your time with me today. Your presence here means more than you know. Until we meet again, take care of yourself and keep listening with your heart.